Okay, welcome to the class on Slenderful Eating. That's one of the 4 foundational principles, which is timing of meals and schedule the how and when of eating. And in this class, we're going to highlight this last principle, which will allow you to release your excess weight in a healthy and sustainable way. In previous classes, you learned about the first 3 foundational principles of Slenderful Eating, which are eating more highly nutritious foods, eliminating cravings, and managing quantities. And so we've been getting really clear exactly what we need to do differently with our eating in order to become slender for good and live in healthy, right-sized bodies. So in today's lesson, you'll get a much better understanding of how to time your meals in order to have the best results. And it's important partly because the way most people around us are eating and snacking all day is contributing to overeating and metabolic troubles, excess weight gain, and ill health. Once you employ the practices I recommend and get into the habit of eating 3 meals and no snacks, you'll gain more of a sense of clarity and freedom about eating, and your weight loss will become much more predictable. And 50 years ago, everyone knew that snacking led to excess weight. But now it's very normal for people to think we really need to be snacking on and off all day long. And research indicates that we eat twice as many snacks today as we did in the 1970s. So a lot of people in our culture these days really consider snacks essential. So people will send their child on a field trip, and not just with a lunch, but with snacks for the morning and the afternoon. You go to Weight Watchers, and they think snacks are so essential that they sell these highly processed snack foods. So it's just something that people now consider to be normal and necessary. And we kind of need to get our mindsets back to the understanding that snacking all day is going to lead to excess weight. I thought it was absolutely necessary and healthy to eat many times a day myself. And this is, now I look back and it's really clear that's a big part of what was leading to my weight gain. I used to get dizzy a lot when I would stand up, and it would happen over and over throughout the day. And I would find myself ending up having to lean against the wall, and people would express concern. It was really pretty embarrassing. But what I believed was going on was that my blood sugar was crashing, and so I believed that I needed to eat every 2 to 3 hours to manage my blood sugar. So I did, and that's just led to eating way too much, and it led to excess weight and a bunch of health problems. Once I decided, and I believed this really, really strongly, like you couldn't have convinced me otherwise. It took me quite a bit of effort to try to just try not to do this, try to eat every 5 or 6 hours instead of every 2 to 3 hours. And once I did that, my blood sugar really stabilized. So now what I understand is I was keeping my blood sugar artificially high. And that leads to a whole bunch of health problems. It leads to problems with our organs and problems with that can be related to diabetes. So I'm really glad I was willing to try that. And I'm going to talk a little more about that myth that we need to eat really frequently in a bit. So eating too often causes insulin resistance. And if you want to read more about this, I got a lot of this information from Jason Fung and the Obesity Code. So insulin is a hormone that the pancreas makes, and it allows our cells to absorb and use glucose. And when people have insulin resistance, their cells become unable to use insulin effectively. Our food choices play a role. So highly processed carbs, especially sugar, lead to increased insulin levels and weight gain. And insulin resistance has to do with a vicious cycle. So we eat, and then our bodies make insulin. And then when there's too much insulin in the system, our cells start resisting insulin. And so the body produces more. And so insulin levels stay artificially high, and sugar gets stored as fat instead of used as energy, and we feel tired and hungry, and that drives us to eat more. So eating too often leads to insulin resistance. So there's this time frame issue with weight gain and weight loss that most weight loss approaches don't address at all. So you're going to eat these different foods, or you're going to eat these different amounts of foods, and that's going to lead to weight loss. But when we've had excess weight for a long time, it's a lot harder for us than people who have had excess weight for a shorter time. And this is because of insulin resistance. Our cells are not responding efficiently to insulin in the system anymore. And so these high persistent levels of insulin cause insulin resistance, and that sets our weight at a higher set point. So exposure leads to resistance, similar to with antibiotic resistance or viral resistance or drug resistance. High doses cause more resistance, and more resistance causes us to go for higher doses. So it keeps the cycle going. And the timing of meals relates to insulin secretion and insulin resistance. So we secrete hormones in bursts, like melatonin. We should have bursts of it when we need it at night for sleep, and lower levels of it during the morning, etc. Cortisol too, we should have in bursts. You know, when we need to run because we're going to miss the bus, we should have a release of cortisol that gives us that kind of burst of energy. But if we have high levels of cortisol all the time or much of the time, it really starts to tear down our body. Other hormones too. So the periodic release of these hormones is essential in preventing resistance. It should be a burst, and then it should start to come down and go down further, and then another burst. But when the body's exposed to a constant stimulus of any of these hormones, it acclimates to it. And so high persistent levels create resistance. So to develop resistance, we need both high hormonal levels and a constant stimulus. And when we're eating on and off all day, that's what we're getting, both high hormonal levels of insulin and a constant stimulus of insulin. And our body doesn't react well to that. So what we want is a brief pulse of hormones, which ends. This is one of the big reasons we want to go to 3 meals and no snacks. And there's pretty good evidence that we can create insulin resistance by giving you insulin, and that when we change the amount of insulin into your system, that we can reduce your insulin resistance. And there's good evidence that insulin causes weight gain. So you could be insulin resistant for many years without knowing it, because it doesn't typically trigger noticeable symptoms, but it increases your risk of being overweight, of having high triglycerides, of having elevated blood pressure and elevated blood sugar, and prediabetes or diabetes, and all the symptoms of diabetes too, being tired, feeling hungry even after you just had a meal, tingling sensations in the hands or feet, and increased or more frequent urination, and the development of dark skin patches. The longer this vicious cycle continues, the worse it becomes. So we're finding that obesity is time dependent. It's like rust. It takes time to develop. And the longer the vicious cycle continues, the worse it becomes. So if your insulin levels stay high, your body's set weight stays high. Your body's homeostasis mechanisms will try to keep your weight at that level. So a diet high in foods that provoke an insulin response can initiate obesity, but over time, insulin resistance becomes a larger and larger part of the problem, a major driver of high insulin levels and obesity. So once that's happening, changing what you eat may not be enough. We may also have to change how frequently we eat. So how can you prevent or reverse insulin resistance? So that's also another way of saying that is, how can you improve insulin sensitivity? So one is to lose weight. Even losing 10 or 10% of your weight can be a big improvement in your insulin resistance and your insulin sensitivity. Getting regular exercise and getting enough sleep. can make a really big difference. Researchers found that just one night of sleep deprivation boosted insulin resistance as much as eating high-fat foods for 6 months. I always get upset about this because sleep can be a problem for me, but it's become so much better. I'd say it's 90% better since I changed the way I eat. Another thing is to avoid foods that spike your insulin too high and eat, highly processed carbs or sugar. And another way is to time your meals so that insulin release is briefer, more periodic, rather than constant throughout the day. So I recommend you eat 3 meals a day and no snacks. So you have the quantities of the different types of food to eat at meals, and that makes a big difference in achieving healthy weight loss. But also eating 3 meals and no snacks makes a really big difference too. It supports healthy weight loss and building strong, slenderful eating habits too. And most people who believe they need to eat more often don't. I believed it really strongly and it didn't turn out to be true. So let's talk a little about that myth that eating a lot of meals and snacks boosts metabolism. There's some evidence that skipping breakfast is associated with obesity and inadequate nutrition. There's other evidence that kind of disputes that. Conclusions have probably been too generalized from that to saying we need to eat more often. So research does continue to disprove the idea that eating more than 3 meals a day improves metabolism. So recent research is showing that the more often someone eats, the higher their BMI, their, what does that mean again? I can't remember, body mass index. And then people who identify as usual snackers are the most likely to gain significant weight, and they're 70% more likely to become obese. So what is the problem with snacks? One is the food choices. 2014 Nielsen report showed that 41% of North Americans ate snacks instead of dinner at least once in the previous 30 days. In my family, that's one of the rules for Sunday night is there's no meal, only snacks. And the most likely snacks are chips, chocolate, or cheese. So they tend to be highly processed, low nutrition, craveable foods. So that's one of the problems. Eating more meals and fewer snacks is associated with healthier food choices that include more real whole foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and lean proteins. Eating more snacks tends to involve eating more processed foods that are high in fat, sugar, salt, and excess calories such as chips, energy bars, cookies, and candy, which leads to being both overweight and undernourished. Another problem with snacks is it can lead to the psychology of eating whatever, whenever, wherever, kind of recreational eating, and that quickly becomes overeating. And in my experience, when we have the idea that we need to have snacks, we're looking for healthier snack options. That's kind of our approach. It tends to be a trap. We generally don't really need snacks. It's all in our mind. And people used to know this just even 50 years ago. So it's really just a change in our culture and our psychology. And the third problem with snacks is it's harder to build good eating habits. For most of us, it's a lot easier and clearer to build good, slenderful eating habits with a 3 meals and nothing else approach. It makes our slenderful eating habits automatic a lot more easily, and that means you don't have to rely on willpower to say no to snacks between meals, and that is a massive benefit. The feeling that goes along with that is something that's really hard to even convey. It's so clear and calm and clean. It's not, I can't have that, it's not mealtime. As my client Barb says 3 months into the program, I can definitely attest to this. People will offer me foods that I would never have said no to, foods that they prepared themselves that are really special, but I would have regretted it. It would have been more food than I needed for the day. So it's just so easy now to say, I just don't eat between meals, and to feel no stress over it whatsoever. So I recommend spacing meals about 4 to 6 hours apart. When you eat more frequently than that, it complicates your digestion. From what I have read, what I believe is that we end up carrying waste around in our bowels for a lot longer when we eat too frequently. And it also keeps our blood sugar and our insulin too high. If you wait too long, you go beyond 6 hours, it can make your blood sugar dip too low, and that can make your appetite too big. And it can make you, like for me, I know not only can I eat too much at the next meal, but even I can have more anxiety and desire to eat more the next day and the next couple of days. Can be a good idea, at least there's some research suggesting it's a good idea to have breakfast within about an hour of waking up. But eating too frequently has a bunch of drawbacks. It takes about 3 hours for your body to finish digesting a meal. So if you eat every 2 to 3 hours, your body's always in the process of digesting food. So I think about it like, do I really want more food on top of food that's still digesting? I don't think so. And eating too frequently keeps your blood sugar high. Blood sugar levels are supposed to rise after a meal as food is being digested and converted into glucose. And then the blood sugar level is supposed to fall back to baseline as the glucose is taken up by the cells and used for energy or stored for future use. Having your blood sugar fall to baseline helps protect you from developing diabetes. If you experience headaches, fatigue, dizziness, etc., when you go 2 to 3 hours without eating, the problem is probably not that your blood sugar has gotten too low, but that it's been too high for too long. And there's also indication that timing meals to fit within a 10 to 12 hour window, like between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., helps decrease cardiovascular risk and promote weight loss. And there's a bonus if you can achieve a 14-hour fasting window, like breakfast at 7 a.m., lunch at 12, and dinner at 5. There's extra benefits. With a 14-hour fasting period, we see increased fat loss, improved energy levels, better sleep, and actually we see better cell repair and regeneration and better protection against infection and disease. I haven't really worked on this one yet, a 14-hour fasting period, but I think it's the next thing I'm going to do, also because of the fat around the middle kind of being a hard thing to change at this stage. And it's very clear that eating late at night is detrimental to the cause. So eating within 2 or 3 hours of bedtime, it increases your blood sugar and insulin, which makes it harder to fall asleep. And eating too close to bedtime is also shown to increase cardiometabolic risk factors and cardiovascular disease. We see that people who work the midnight shift and eat during times that most people are asleep tend to have higher blood sugar, cholesterol, and triglyceride levels. And it's at least partly due to the disruption of circadian rhythms. So the summary of benefits to eating 3 meals a day and no snacks. There's various benefits for your health and bodily functioning. It keeps your blood sugar in the normal ups and downs, and it improves your insulin sensitivity and your insulin functioning and reduces insulin resistance. And that makes it possible to reset your weight set point. And your body produces more anti-aging and muscle building hormones. And there's benefits for your psychology and habit change too. It helps you be really clear when it's time to eat and when it's not time to eat. So it reduces the amount of time during the day that you're thinking about food and eating, which is kind of an amazing experience. I didn't realize I was thinking about food and eating kind of all day before until I made this change. It reduces temptations and the need to exert willpower, which is a giant benefit because willpower is an inexhaustible resource. We don't want to have to be relying on our willpower to eat this way. We want it really to become habit. And we get much more calm and peace about food and eating when we move to this kind of schedule. So now we've got the 4 fundamentals of Slenderful Eating, that what I've found when we bring these 4 together, that's what produces healthy, sustainable weight loss. You eat a lot more highly nutritious foods, maybe 4 to 10 times the amount that the average person eats. So your body gets the nutrition it needs to be healthy, to repair itself. And you feel satisfied with the amount that you're eating because you're eating so much nutrition. You eliminate and avoid cravings by eliminating certain low nutrition, cravingful food-like substances. And that allows your brain and body to heal. And it's a complete game changer for being able to put food in its place rather than experiencing lots of stress and regret over what you eat. You eat the right quantities of different types of food for living slender. Most people are eating way too much of the types of foods that are highly processed and cravingful and low nutrition, and at the same time, they're not eating nearly enough of the highly nutritious foods. So they're introducing harmful substances that their bodies have to cope with over and over and over, and they're feeling too often hungry and dissatisfied, while you're generally satisfied and calm about your food, and then hungry enough at mealtime to really enjoy a gigantic amount of nutritious foods. And finally, you're eating 3 meals and no snacks, and that keeps your blood sugar in a healthy range and helps you reset your weight set point back down. It also helps you be a lot clearer when it's time to eat and to build these healthy, slenderful habits and to feel calm and clear and uninterested in eating when it's not time to eat. So when you're really working with your body rather than against it, your body responds in such a healthy, happy way, and it supports your weight loss rather than fighting it. And as a bonus, you get a healthier body to live in. So just quickly to talk about exceptions. So you're trying to build habits so that you don't have to rely on willpower. So we want to be careful with exceptions. So an exception that I will often allow and find doesn't hurt me and often doesn't hurt my clients is if I forgot my apple at lunchtime, as long as it's still within an hour from lunch, I'll go and get an apple. Or sometimes if I'm going to an exercise class, but I'm afraid I'll be just way too hungry after and will end up overeating, I'll split my dinner in half and I'll eat half of my dinner before exercise and half after exercise. And I also allow extra food during certain times, like if I'm training for a marathon, I never do that, but I do perform with a symphony, and sometimes our performance is demanding enough that it is a bit like a marathon. So I will allow myself extra food at the break, at the intermission, to be able to get through the concert and feel good and have enough energy. And that's usually something like an apple or a handful of almonds. So I don't go to completely different foods. But what are some good rules of thumb for exceptions? One is to make them rare, because deviations from this way of eating impact our results. So what research has shown is that following the plan 94% of the time seems to work fine, but following it 88% of the time doesn't. So we want to be, a lot of times when people are dieting, they're thinking, well, I'm going to make exceptions on the weekends, or I'm going to make exceptions in this way every day. And they're making too many exceptions to have success. So it's a really pretty small number of exceptions that will let us have success with this. Our body needs what it needs. One thing that is a good idea when you're changing your food is to write it down in advance rather than just grabbing something and saying, well, I feel a little bit extra hungry, so I'm going to grab something extra. So, and then only eat what you've written down. So you're not changing back to a habit of eating whatever, whenever, wherever. And when you're making exceptions, it can be a good idea to be accountable to someone like your coach, like this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to try this for this period of time, and I'm not doing whatever. I'm just doing this thing, and I'm going to observe what happens. And then check how you're feeling and behaving before and after. And you might want to track for several days after. when we start making some exceptions, we can get a bit of excitement with our food again that can sort of take us off track. And so we want to kind of observe our excitement around food. It's like we want to keep a middle way kind of attitude about our excitement and our pleasure with food. We don't want to go to an extreme level. And eating more when we exercise is a big reason exercise fails to produce weight loss. So I caution about this. Many of us do better if we put off starting an exercise program until we've released our excess weight and our slenderful eating habits are very automatic. So I want to ask what surprised you in this lesson and what's most important for you to implement from this learning. And I want to invite you to get into action with this last, the fourth piece of Slenderful Eating, and do the worksheet and make your decision about, I'm going to eat these 3 meals and no snacks, and I'm going to definitely give this a chance for a while. And you're on the path to Slender for Good. If you find this information empowering for eating on a healthy, slenderful schedule, and if you can envision how much more calm and clear you'll feel eating on a schedule like this, and if you're ready to start and sustain the habit of eating 3 meals a day and no snacks.